Welcome to Sassy Sisters Crafting. I'm Sassy Amanda, along with my sister, Sassy Angie, and we will be sharing our crafting ideas with you. Today, I am going to go over some crazy quilts, and I will do a series of different quilts, how to do them. These crazy quilts, most of them were made by my grandmother, who is 92 years old, almost 93. She's been doing them since she was young, and she taught me all that I know. So this first quilt we're going to talk about is a crazy quilt that was not planned. You usually have planned ones or not planned ones. A not planned crazy quilt is basically where you take all of your leftover scrap and you just make a quilt out of it any way you would like. This one is not squares. It's different shapes. As you can see, we have small, large, long strips here. We also do have some that are put into squares, just showing you different kinds. I remember that there was a quilt made with these flowers. There were lots of them. You can obviously see that there was a cow quilt. One time here she made a triangle. This one's kind of at a different, where it starts thin and gets larger. She just added in a little piece. She ran out of material there. Another triangle, and a lot of cow material. She made several cow quilts because a lot of people knew she liked cows and she liked making them. There's also parts where you can have a very large piece because you like the picture. And so when you do the large piece, all you have to do is just fit other smaller pieces next to it. And she just pulled pieces of fabric from lots of different quilts she had. Now these are very old. I've had them for at least 20 years or so. And if you look at them, you can see how the stitching, she makes stitching that goes like on the edge. She makes crosses. Some of the stitching she will just done an X, and then some of them she will have done an X, and then there's a stitch right in the middle of this. I know you can't really see it, but there's a stitching right in the middle of it, but she didn't do a stitching all the way across. So, oh, and then here, you can probably see this one because it's darker, but there's an X, then there's a line down the middle, another X, and then she stitched all the way around it. So it didn't matter to her if it was the same in each one. That's part of being a crazy quilt. You just do it however you like. Pull whatever material you have left over from other quilts or other sewing projects. And here on the edge, she decided she was going to put this red cow material that she used on another quilt, and then she did blue on the side, and I thought that made it very unique. The backing, a lot of people use solid colors for backing. She used a flower. It did not take away from the rest of the quilt because it is a crazy quilt. You're not trying to match materials or try to make the quilt be some kind of special design. Here is just a regular quilt where you picked a design. So you chose the different fabrics. This one's pretty old too, but you chose the different fabrics. You got a lot of that fabric, a lot of that one, a lot of this one, and then you just cut them into triangles, or you could cut them into squares, and at some point you just end up with a bunch of squares. Then you make one big square, and then you sew it to another big square, to another big square, and you end up with a quilt all with the same design. So your leftover material from making something like this will then can be used in a crazy quilt in the future. This has a very different, I would never have thought to put stripes on the back of this, but it actually goes pretty darn well. And so this one doesn't have a solid, and in this case she just took this and brought it over as the edging, which is usually what she does for most of it. But this one has the same exact stitching all throughout. And this is all done by hand, the stitching, not a sewing machine. The sewing machine's only used when sewing the pieces of material together at the beginning for the top of the quilt. This is the top, this is the back. So in this quilt, they're all triangles, so there's no odd designs in this quilt. But as you can see, they're from many different ones that she's made before. So she tended to like triangles for some reason. Personally, I think it's easier when you just do squares. You can see how worn this one is. A lot of the quilts, people say that you're not supposed to wash them too often because the fabric wears and tears and they're family heirlooms, but I had young children and they would get stuff on them, they would spill drinks on them, and we didn't want to not use them because what's the point of having one if you're not going to use it? So then this one on the back has a pretty flower, not a solid color. And here is a crazy quilt that I haven't used that much. It is not as large as my bed, so I only use it kind of as a backup, but I really love it. She threw in different sizes all over the place. Some of the stitching she did, I don't know if you can see it, but it is V stitching all the way across instead of trying to make like X's in here somehow. So I really like that part of the stitching. And then this block, she cut it in half like that and then did an X, an X, an X, and an X. So you can see the stitching from this side, but when it's a solid color, you can also see the stitching really well from the back side. You can see. And this one was folded over for the edge, just like the other one. So those are some crazy quilts that my grandmother has made with different material that she just had left over from making other quilts. And these were all unplanned crazy quilts. So here's an example of how I have a planned crazy quilt that I will do one day. This is a fall type of material, and I'm going to get other fall or Halloween materials, and I plan to make like a lap throw type thing to go on my rocking chair in my living room, where I will have just random pieces of the same themed fabric. The same goes for my Christmas crazy quilt that I'm planning to do. So far I only have 3 pieces. A normal quilt, I might just do squares of this, squares of this, squares of this, and maybe a green or some other color that would match it well, a solid color, and then I would just make squares. And it would be a normal quilt, or I could do triangles like grandmother did. But I want to do a crazy quilt because I get inspired by my grandmother, and she liked to do them, and I tend to like that as well. So I'm going to get more material, and we'll just do strips and squares and triangles and rectangles and all kinds of shapes. Another idea is that you could have a holiday quilt. So you could do fall, Christmas, you could do Valentine's Day or Easter, and there is no wrong way to make a crazy quilt. It's whatever you desire. So those are some of our ideas, and in the future I will show you how to cut squares, how to cut the different shapes, and how to work on building these crazy quilts. So see you next time.